God bless America. Hello, everybody. I am the Talk Radio Protege. This is the Protege program. Thank you so much for joining me. It has happened. The pick has been made. The draft is over, and it's Brett Kavenaugh. He is going to be the next Supreme Court pick, and the left despises him. I don't think that they know anything about Brett Kavenaugh for certain, and they hate him already. It's been, what, it's been about a dozen hours or so, a little bit more. Yeah, it's been closer to 18. We're getting there. It's been nearly 24 hours since the announcement. And I am wondering, what kind of justice is Brett Kavenaugh going to be? Today's been the day that I've done the most research on Mr. Kavenaugh. I've only heard rumors and various one-line appraisals of him by other commentators before today, but I did a lot more reading about him today, and I think I still have some apprehensions about him, but I'm not thinking that this is a doom and gloom type of pick. I'm not thinking that this is going to be another Anthony Kennedy. I don't think that this is a grand slam out of the park Antonin Scalia type pick. I don't think that Brett Kavenaugh is going to be the next Neil Gorsuch, but I do think he's going to be a fine pick. And I want to show you why that is. We're going to use this Fox News column to talk about some of that. Now, Fox breaks it up by the issues. I'm going to break it up by what I think we could call characteristics of what a Kavenaugh legacy on the Supreme Court is going to look like. So the headline from Fox News, so that you can find the story: Kavanaugh's staunch gun rights defense among hundreds of decisions in spotlight. Now, like I said, I want to break this up by characterizations of what the what Kavanaugh's legacy on this court is going to look like. And first of all, I think that his tenure on the Supreme Court is going to be constructionistic. Now, I'm not calling him a pure 100% constructionist because of something that we're going to get to a little bit later, but I'm calling it constructionistic. And that's because a lot of the language that Kavenaugh uses when he writes in his opinions and when he talks about what the duty of a court justice is constructionistic. So we're going to scroll down here to Fox News' first section, which is about gun rights, and we're going to read a quote from Kavanaugh's dissent in Heller versus District of Columbia. Now, at the D.C. Circuit Court, the D.C. Circuit upheld the District of Columbia's ban. Now, eventually this case made it to the Supreme Court, and they overturned the ban. But when the Circuit Court ruled, when the Appeals Court ruled, Kavenaugh wrote, our task is to apply the Constitution and the precedents of the Supreme Court, regardless of whether the result is one we agree with as a matter of first principles or policy. Now, that is a very good thing to hear a Supreme Court justice write. And this statement, backed up by a record that adheres to the statement, points to a constructionalist Supreme Court justice. Now, everybody that goes forward to have a hearing about the Supreme Court is going to say that they're going to uphold the Constitution and that they're going to adhere to precedent. I'm sure, and I haven't listened to the hearings of Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, but I'm sure they said exactly the same thing. But I think that the voting records of Kagan, of Sotomayor, of Ginsburg do not reflect this type of thinking about the Supreme Court and about the duties of the courts. Now, where I have a couple of misgivings about Kavenaugh is in my second point about what his Supreme Court tenure, I think, is going to look like. Kavenaugh, I think, is creative but not activistic. Now, let me illustrate for you what I mean when I say that. And we'll use a couple of Fox News' sections to talk about this. First of all, on abortion. Fox News writes about a case in which Kavenaugh commented in 2017. In a dissent in a 2017 case involving an illegal immigrant who wished to be released from custody in order to obtain an abortion, Kavenaugh wrote that the majority opinion was radically inconsistent with 40 years of Supreme Court precedent. He argued if the government helped the 17-year-old obtain an abortion, it ignores its permissible interest in favoring fetal life. But despite this interest, Kavenaugh suggested during oral arguments that releasing the teen to a sponsor would solve the government's objection and allow her to get an abortion. Now, this, I think, is creative thinking on the part of Kavenaugh that is not necessarily judicial activism. I think it would be judicial activism for Kavenaugh to, by judicial fiat, enact his suggestion. Now, let me explain that with this blurb on Obamacare. This was the big red flag that was my opinion on Kavenaugh before I did some more research. Now, it turns out that Kavenaugh suggested that Kavenaugh dissented in the case that was a challenge to Obamacare, but in his dissent, he suggested that the individual mandate provision could fit comfortably within Congress's taxing clause power. And this is where I was hearing the rumor that Kavenaugh had written the justification for Obamacare, for the Obamacare mandate, as a tax. Now, on a philosophical level, I disagree with the Obamacare mandate because it compels a person to participate in commerce or pay a quote-unquote tax, which makes it a de facto fine. And Kavenaugh is saying that Kavenaugh basically takes a different opinion. He thinks that if Congress taxes someone for not doing something, that is within Congress's purview. In other words, he might have a philosophical disagreement with the mandate, but he thinks that as long as Congress enacts the mandate through a tax, that it is within Congress's federal purview. So perhaps if I am not a legislative, I'm not a federal law expert. I think I have a good deal of knowledge, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert, certainly not on the level that we require judges and lawyers to be. So, I am open to the idea that Kavenaugh has more knowledge about this than I do. I simply have you could call it an ideological disagreement with the statement that it would be within Congress's power to tax, to enable the federal mandate as a tax. Now, I think that what Kavenaugh did in this case is different from what Roberts did. Now, Shapiro cited this incident. Ben Shapiro cited this incident as Kavenaugh is going to be the next John Roberts. Now, I look at this and I see Kavenaugh being as creative as Roberts without being as activist as Roberts. Now, what Roberts did in this initial mandate turned the Obamacare mandate into a tax rather than a fine. What Kavenaugh did was suggest that Congress should do that, not that the court should do that. And that's my understanding of this based on Fox News' reporting. If my understanding of this is correct, then Kavenaugh is, as I say, creative but not activistic. Kavenaugh sees the way that Congress could write a law such that it would be constitutional, but he refrains from That's what Roberts did, and I'm saying that this does not seem to be what Kavenaugh did in this situation. What he did would be like what commentators do when they point out a way that Congress could do something constitutional without enacting it themselves. Let me know if you think that that's what Kavenaugh was doing in this court case, or if you... I think this is kind of a dangerous thing for Kavenaugh to do, but I don't think... It might be a little activistic for Kavenaugh to do this, for him to take a court case and point and say, here's what you could do to be constitutional, and I'm not going to do that because it's not my place. You tell me if you think that's activistic. I don't think that it is so much. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about from this Fox News column, and of course you can go and look it up yourself if you want to read more about the policies that Fox News is pointing out Kavenaugh as being aligned with, but Kavenaugh appears to have a controversial opinion as it refers to presidential protections. Now we're going to read quite a bit of this in verbatim. Kavenaugh worked with Ken Starr in the 90s, co-writing the Independent Counsel's report laying out the legal framework supporting then Bill Clinton's impeachment. In 2009, citing his role with the investigation into Clinton, Kavenaugh expressed his opinion that presidents should not have to deal with criminal investigations or civil lawsuits while in office. Kavenaugh said, "I think we grossly underestimate how difficult the job of president is. Because of that," he said, he believes it's vital that the president be able to focus on his never-ending tasks with as few distractions as possible. Looking back to the 90s, the nation certainly would have been better off if President Clinton could have focused on bin Laden without being distracted by the Paula Jones sexual harassment case and its criminal investigation offshoots. Even the lesser burdens of a criminal investigation are time-consuming and distracting. Like civil suits, criminal investigations take the president's focus away from his or her responsibilities to the people. And a president who is concerned about an ongoing criminal investigation is almost inevitably going to do a worse job as president. Now, I call that a controversial opinion for this reason. Do you think that President Trump would be better off if he didn't have to worry about the Russia investigation until after he left office? What if we wrote a constitutional amendment? Because I think that's what it would take in order to enable what Kavenaugh is writing about here. Legally, that is. If the Supreme Court were to enact this by judicial fiat, I think that would be a terribly wrong decision to make. I think a constitutional amendment would be a much better way to enable what Kavenaugh is writing about. What if President Trump could be assured that his presidency would not be challenged by the Russia investigation? Only after he left office would he be faced with any indictments that might arise from this investigation. I think that would do a couple of things. First of all, I think it would free up the president to be more concerned about his day-to-day activities and about enacting his agenda. I think it would also put a lot more political pressure on voters to be more involved. If they think that a president is guilty of a criminal action, then they should go to the polls and vote that president out of office. Now, I think that the current system, where a president can be held accountable during his presidency for a law that he has broken, is better than the alternative. I think that if a president is guilty of committing a crime, then he is duly being held up by the criminal investigations. Now, on the other hand, if a president is not guilty of committing this crime, then he is being unduly held up by the criminal investigations. So the sword kind of cuts both ways. Let me know if you think that this is a controversial opinion, or if you think that it's a fair point. I myself think that it's both, that it is raising a fair point about the duties of a president and about the what's the word that I'm looking for? About the obstructing of his duties as president at the same time as it is a controversial opinion. Now, I want to go to Breitbart's reporting on Kavanaugh's, I call it his introductory speech, when he was introduced as President Trump's nomination, because it says a lot of good things, and as long as the record backs up what Kavanagh says, then it's great. But there are a couple of weasel words that I think are woven in here. After the announcement of his nomination to the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh stated, "A judge must be independent and must interpret the law, not make the law. A judge must interpret statutes as written, and a judge must interpret the Constitution as written, informed by history, tradition, and precedent." Kavanagh said, "The framers established that the Constitution is designed to secure the blessings of liberty. Just as Kennedy devoted his career to securing the liberty, I am deeply honored to be nominated to fill his seat on the Supreme Court." He also said, "My judicial philosophy is straightforward." And then it restates that statement that we read earlier. For the past 11 years, I've taught hundreds of students, primarily at Harvard Law School. I teach that the Constitution's separation of powers protects individual liberty, and I remain grateful to the dean who hired me, Justice Elena Kagan. As a judge, I hire 4 law clerks each year. I look for the best. My law clerks come from diverse backgrounds and points of view. I am proud that a majority of my law clerks have been women. So some of that language there is progressive pandering, which I don't think is going to achieve anything in terms of Kavanagh being confirmed to the Supreme Court. But you may not have picked out some of the weasel words that are in there, and I only call them weasel words because of the nature of some of what we're about to talk about. Kavanagh says that a judge must interpret statutes as written, and a judge must interpret the Constitution as written, informed by history and tradition and precedent. Now, why do I call this sentence full of containing some weasel words? Well, precedent gives Kavanagh some wiggle room to act without the bounds of Constitution, but within the bounds, without the bounds of the Constitution, but within the bounds of judicial precedent. Because there are some judicial precedents that are travesties, that spit in the face of the Constitution, that undo constitutional and foundational protections. In my opinion, and I think that this is backed up by founding principles, Roe versus Wade is a travesty. Roe versus Wade is despicable judicial precedent because it undermines the protection of the right to life that is given to Americans via various amendments to the United States Constitution and to the Declaration of Independence. So, by citing precedent, Kavanagh is giving himself a little bit of wiggle room, to be the kind of Supreme Court justice that Roberts is, the kind of Supreme Court justice that at times Kennedy was. So this is why I think that Kavanagh is not a grand slam dunk pick that he could have been. I would like for all of the Supreme Court justices to be constitutional originalists and to seek for the Constitution and the laws that we pass in this country to be interpreted via the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And I think that Kavanagh is mostly going to do that, but not all the time, which is why I think that he's not a grand slam. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Tell me what your opinions are on Kavanagh as the pick. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you want to see more content like it, hit subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so that you don't miss a single video. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope that you'll come back next time. Until then, good night and God bless.